There is a book that was quoted in your Bible and then erased from it. Its words are spoken aloud in the pages of the New Testament. The Apostle Jude reached back and quoted it directly by name as prophecy. The earliest Christians read it and treasured it and wrestled with it. And then, somewhere across the long centuries, it vanished from the Western world entirely. Set aside, condemned, forgotten so completely that for more than 1,000 years, most of Christendom believed it was gone for good, and yet it was never gone. High in the mountains of Ethiopia, in an ancient language few outsiders could read, the book had been kept, copied by hand, generation after generation, quietly waiting. And when it finally surfaced again and was carried back to the wider world, people opened it and found something staggering inside. The story that the rest of Scripture only whispers. Here, told in full, is how the angels fell. Not a line or two in passing, the whole account. 200 of them, and the oath they swore, and the forbidden things they taught to men, and the monstrous children they fathered upon the earth. Here is the real reason the great flood was sent. And here is a man, one man, still living, carried up past the stars to stand before the throne of God and sent back down with a map of the invisible world, the prison of the fallen, the chambers of the waiting dead, the mountain where God will one day sit, and a figure whose name was spoken before the sun was ever made. His name was Enoch. He walked with God, and the old story says that one day he simply was not, because God took him. But before he went, he wrote down everything he had seen. This is the book of Enoch, and it begins with 200 watchers standing on a mountaintop in the last quiet moment before the world changed forever. Chapter 1. The Oath on Mount Hermon. They were called watchers because they never closed their eyes. While the world below leaned into sleep, they kept the long vigil at the rim of heaven. The sons of God, the children of the morning, set over the earth to guard it and to watch it. That was their office, and it was their name. To watch, to keep, to never look away. For age upon age, they had done exactly that, and the world beneath them had been enough. But the world had grown crowded with living things. The children of men had multiplied across the plains and the river valleys, and among them, in those days, were born daughters. And the daughters were beautiful. They moved through the ordinary light of the ordinary earth, drawing water, singing at their work, unaware that anything watched them at all. And the watchers, who had never in all their ages looked away from anything, found that now they could not look away from this. Something turned in them that had never turned before. Longing is a strange thing to be born in a being that was made without it. It came quietly at first, the way weather gathers, one of them lingering a moment too long on a girl by the water, another following with his eyes a woman down an evening road. Then it passed among them like a whispered word, and once it had been spoken even in silence, it could not be unspoken. "Look at them," they said to one another. "See how lovely the daughters of men are. Come, let us choose wives for ourselves from among the children of men, and let them bear us children." It was madness, and they knew it was madness. They were spirits, holy, eternal, made for heaven and not for the dust. To bind themselves to the daughters of the dust was to cross a line that had been drawn before the foundations of the world. Every one of them knew where that line lay, and every one of them had already, in his heart, stepped over it. Their leader was Semjaza, and Semjaza was afraid. Not afraid of the desire. He shared it. He was afraid of standing alone when the reckoning came. He looked at the others, at their bright and hungry faces, and he saw how easily a plan like this could unravel. 100 voices loud in the dark, and then, when the morning of judgment broke, 100 voices suddenly gone quiet, each one stepping back, each one pointing at him. "I fear you will not truly go through with this," he told them. "I fear that when the price of so great a sin has to be paid, I will be the only one left to pay it, and I will bear it alone." And there it was, the moment the whole story might still have turned. If even one of them had said, "Then let us not do it," the door was still open. Instead, they found a darker answer. "Then let us all swear an oath," they said. "Let us bind ourselves to one another by a curse, every one of us, that none will abandon this plan, that we will see it through, all of us together, or none of us at all." They had not made themselves braver. They had made themselves trapped. The oath did not give them the strength to go forward. It took from them the freedom to turn back. Each swore so that no other could escape, and in swearing, sealed his own escape shut. And they swore. 200 of them, there in the high cold air, bound each to each by mutual curses, their voices braided into a single vow that rose off the mountain and did not return. They had come down in the days of Jared, descending out of the height onto the summit of a great mountain in the north, where the snow never wholly leaves the peak and the air is thin enough to ache. And afterward, men gave that mountain a name drawn from the very thing that had happened there. They called it Hermon, the mountain of the curse, the mountain of the oath, because upon its summit the sons of heaven had sworn and bound themselves by the vow that would ruin the earth. Their leaders were many, and their names were remembered long after: Semjazah, who led them, and Arakiba, and Ramiel, and Kokabiel, Tamiel, and Ramiel, and Danil, Ezekiel, and Barakijal, and Asael, whom later ages would learn to fear by another name: Armaros, Batarel, Ananel, Zachiel, and Samsapil, and Satarel, Turel, and Jomjael, and Sariel. These were the chiefs, each one set over 10 times 10 of the fallen, captains of a host that had traded eternity for a single burning night. They stood upon Hermon, with the oath still cooling in the air around them, 200 against the stars, and below them the lamps of the human world came on one by one in the gathering dark, small and warm and utterly unaware. The watchers looked down, and then they came down. Chapter 2. The Forbidden Teachings and the Giants. They came down, and they took wives. Each chose one for himself from among the daughters of men, and went in to them, and defiled himself with them. Spirit joined to flesh. The eternal poured into the perishable, exactly across the line that every one of them had known was there. And it was not enough for them to take. They had to give as well. They were watchers, keepers of things hidden since the beginning, and now they opened their hands and let the hidden things fall into mortal keeping. They taught their wives charms and enchantments and the cutting of roots. They showed them which plants held power and how to wake it, how to bind and loose with. A word, how to reach for what was not meant to be reached. It seemed a small thing, perhaps, a lover's gift, and it was the first crack in the wall. Knowledge is not evil, but knowledge given out of its season, poured into hands not ready to hold it, becomes a kind of poison. The women learned, and what they learned did not stay with them. Then the women grew heavy with child, and in time they bore. And what they bore was not human. They were giants. Their children came out of them enormous and wrong, growing to heights the earth had never carried, 3,000 ells high, towering things that blotted the sun when they stood. They were the offspring of two worlds that were never meant to meet, and they belonged to neither. And they were hungry. At first the earth could feed them. The giants ate the harvest of whole regions, the herds and the granaries, everything the labor of men had gathered. And then they wanted more, and there was more, and they ate that too. They consumed the acquisitions of men the way fire consumes a field, leaving nothing, moving on. The people worked, and the giants swallowed the work. The people planted, and the giants stripped the fields bare. And still the hunger grew, because it was a hunger with no floor to it. And an appetite like that does not stop when it is fed. It only learns that it can be fed and asks for more. That was the corruption that came through the blood. There was another that came through knowledge, and its great teacher was Azazel. Azazel took men aside and taught them the working of metal. And he did not begin with plowshares. He taught them to make swords and knives and shields and breastplates. He showed them the ores hidden in the ground and the fire that frees the iron from the stone, and he set that fire to the service of killing. Before Azazel, a man who hated his brother had only his hands. After Azazel, he had a blade. The whole grim machinery of war, the edge, the point, the armor to turn the edge, the better edge to defeat the armor, all of it began as a gift from one of the sons of heaven, laid at the feet of men who had not asked whether they should have it. And then, having taught them how to kill each other, he taught them how to lie. He taught the working of bracelets and ornaments, the use of antimony to darken the eyelids, the polishing of costly stones, the mixing of every coloring tincture, the whole art of making a face say what the heart does not, vanity and seduction and disguise, the beauty that is worn to deceive, war in one hand and paint in the other, and both of them meant to turn men against the truth of things, the sword against the truth of a brother's life, the mask against the truth of a face. This was the double gift of Azazel, and the world took it gladly. Nor was he alone. Each of the great ones had a secret, and each gave his secret away. Semjaza deepened what had begun, teaching enchantments and the cutting of roots. Armoros taught the resolving of enchantments, how to unbind what another had bound, so that even sorcery became a contest, magic set against magic, and a whole company of them turned men's eyes to the sky and taught them to read it as a book of fate. Barakijal taught astrology. Kokabel taught the constellations, the fixed lamps and their meanings. Ezekiel taught the knowledge of the clouds, Arachiel, the signs of the earth, Shamsiel, the signs of the sun, and Sariel taught the course of the moon. The heavens that had been made to declare the glory of the one who made them were now taught to men as a set of omens to be mined, as if the stars were a lock, and knowing their courses were the key to prying open tomorrow. Piece by piece, secret by secret, the watchers emptied heaven's storehouse into the world. And the world was not made stronger by it. It was made godless. Fornication spread, and corruption after it, until men were led astray in all their ways, and the memory of what was clean grew faint. The earth that had been given to the children of men filled up instead with sorcery and steel and painted deceit, and the shadow of the giants moving across the land, always hungrier, always larger, always needing more than the earth could give. And the earth could not give forever. The harvests were failing now beneath that endless appetite. The granaries stood empty and the herds were gone, and still the giants rose each morning ravenous, casting their long shadows over villages that had nothing left to offer them. The people looked up at the things their world had made and understood too late what comes when the hunger has eaten everything else. There was only one thing left for it to eat. Chapter 3. The earth cries out, heaven hears. It ate the people. When the fields were bare and the herds were gone, and there was nothing left in all the land to fill them, the giants turned at last upon the men who had made them, and devoured mankind. The children of men, who had labored to feed these things and could labor no more, became themselves the final harvest. There is a particular horror in being consumed by what you have raised. and the earth in those days knew it fully. And once that line was crossed, there were no lines left. The giants fell upon everything that lived. They sinned against the birds of the air and the beasts of the field, against the things that creep and the things that swim, killing without measure, eating without end. And then they turned upon one another, devouring their own kind, and they drank the blood. The whole order of living things, the careful, God-given order in which each creature keeps to its own, was torn open and swallowed. Blood ran into the ground everywhere, more blood than the ground had ever been asked to hold. And the ground would not hold it in silence. The earth itself rose up as a witness. Soaked with the blood of the innocent and emptied of the people who had walked upon it, the land lifted its voice and laid its accusation against the lawless ones, as though the dust could no longer bear the weight of what had been done upon it. The fields that had been made to bring forth life had been made instead to drink death, and they grieved. And their grief was a kind of testimony, mounting up from the desolate places toward the sky. For the dying cried out too. As men perished under the shadow of the giants, they lifted their voices, and those voices did not scatter and fade. They rose. They climbed past the emptied villages and the ruined fields, past the reach of the earth altogether, all the way up to the very gates of heaven. The souls of the slain, gathering at the threshold of the height, making their suit, unwilling and unable to fall silent while the slaughter went on below. Their lamentation reached the doors of heaven and would not cease, because the lawless deeds that fed it would not cease. And at the gates the cry was heard. 4 stood there who had watched from the beginning and had not fallen: Michael, Uriel, Raphael, and Gabriel, holy ones of heaven. And they looked down. They saw the blood being shed across the whole face of the earth. They saw the lawlessness worked in every place, the giants moving over the land, the emptied world crying up toward them. And they said to one another, "The earth made desolate cries out. The voice of its crying has reached the gates of heaven. And now the souls of men are here, pressing their suit upon us, pleading, 'Bring our cause before the Most High.'" So the 4 archangels turned from the ruined earth and brought the cause before the throne. "Lord of lords," they said, "God of gods, King of kings, the throne of thy glory stands through all the generations of the ages, and thy name is holy and glorious and blessed forever. Thou hast made all things, and over all things thou hast power. All things are naked and open before thee. Thou seest everything, and nothing at all can hide itself from thy sight." And having named his majesty and his seeing, they laid the whole ruin before him, not as news, for they knew he needed none, but as a plea that could no longer be held in. "Thou seest what Azazel has done," they said, "who has taught every unrighteousness upon the earth, and has unsealed the eternal secrets that were kept in heaven. The very things that men were straining to learn, poured out now into their hands. And thou seest Semjaza, to whom thou gavest authority over his companions. They have gone down to the daughters of men, and lain with them, and defiled themselves, and revealed to them every kind of sin. And the women have borne giants, and the whole earth is filled, because of them, with blood and with unrighteousness. And now behold," they said, and here their voices carried the weight of all those gathered souls at the gate, "the spirits of the ones who have died are crying out and making their suit to the doors of heaven, and their lamentation has ascended, and it cannot stop. It cannot stop because of the lawless deeds that are done upon the earth." Then came the hardest part of the prayer, the ache of standing before a God who sees everything and had, until now, said nothing. "Thou knowest all things before ever they come to pass," they said. "Thou seest all of this, and thou hast suffered it to be, and thou hast not told us. What are we to do about them in regard to all of this? The question hung in the air of heaven, over the throne of glory, above the desolate and bleeding earth. And heaven prepared its answer. Chapter 4. The Sentence. Then the Most High spoke, the Holy and Great One, and heaven moved. The four who had carried the cry up from the earth were sent back down to answer it: Michael, Uriel, Raphael, Gabriel. The same four who had stood at the gates and pleaded now received their commissions and went out, each with a task, each a hand of the judgment they had asked for. The grief they had brought before the throne came back to the world as a sentence, spoken in 4 parts. And the first word of that sentence was not destruction. It was rescue. The Lord sent Uriel to the son of Lamech, to a righteous man named Noah, with a warning and a gift folded into one. Tell him in my name, he said, hide yourself. Show him what is coming, that the whole earth is about to be destroyed, that a deluge is rising that will wash across all the world and take everything upon it, and then teach him how to escape it, so that he may live, and his seed after him, and a remnant be preserved for all the generations of the world to come. Before a single sentence of punishment was pronounced, a life was saved. Mercy came first. It always comes first. Then came the reckoning, and it began with Azazel, who had given the world the sword and the mask. To Raphael the Lord said, bind Azazel hand and foot, and cast him into the darkness. Go to the desert, to the place called Dudael, and break open the ground, and throw him down into it. Heap rough and jagged rocks upon him. Cover him over with darkness. Let him lie there, and let his face be covered, so that he can never see the light. And let him remain so until the day of the great judgment, when he will be cast at last into the fire. He who had unsealed the secrets of heaven would now be sealed himself, under stone in the dark, unable to see the light he had helped to steal from men. And, said the Lord, heal the earth that the angels have corrupted, proclaim its healing, so that the whole race of men does not perish through all the hidden things the watchers taught. The earth had been poisoned through the works of Azazel. To him ascribe all sin. To Gabriel the Lord turned next and gave him the giants. Go against them, he said, the bastards, the reprobates, the children of fornication, the monstrous sons of the watchers, and bring them to nothing. But mark the manner of it. He did not send Gabriel to slay them by his own hand. He said, set them one against another. Let them destroy each other in battle. The appetite that had eaten the world would be turned at last against itself, brother against brother, until the last of them fell. Length of days they would not have, and their fathers, he said, would beg on their behalf. For the watchers hoped their children might live on 500 years and more, an echo of the eternity the fathers themselves had thrown away. But no petition they made would be granted. What they had made could not be saved. It could only be spent against itself and ended. And last the Lord spoke to Michael and gave him Semjazah and the rest. Go, he said, and bind Semjazah and all his associates who joined themselves to the women and defiled themselves in every uncleanness. But first, let them watch. When their sons have slaughtered one another, when the watchers have seen with their own eyes the destruction of the ones they loved, then bind them fast in the valleys of the earth for 70 generations until the day of their judgment, until the everlasting sentence is at last complete. And in those days they will be led away to the abyss of fire, to the torment and the prison where they will be shut up forever. This was the fuller weight of what they had done, not only to fall, but to be made to watch the ruin of everything their falling had produced, and only then to be bound and to wait generation upon generation. Upon generation, for a fire that had not yet come. Destroy all wrong from the face of the earth, the Lord commanded. Let every evil work come to an end. And then let the plant of righteousness and truth appear. For the sentence did not end in darkness. It ended in a garden. Beyond the flood, beyond the binding, beyond the last of the giants falling in the dust, the Lord unrolled a promise of the world made clean. The righteous would escape and live and beget children by the thousand, and finish all the days of their youth and their old age in peace. The whole earth would be tilled in righteousness and planted with trees and filled with blessing. Vines would be set upon it that would yield wine in abundance. Every measure of seed sown would bring forth 1,000. Every measure of olives, 10 presses of oil. The land that had drunk so much blood would be washed of all oppression and all sin and all godlessness, cleansed of every uncleanness worked upon it, until the children of men became righteous, and every nation bowed and gave worship. And the earth itself was made pure, never to be drowned again, from generation to generation, forever. In those days the Lord said, I will open the storehouses of blessing that are in heaven, and pour them down upon the earth, upon the work and the labor of the children of men. And truth and peace will be joined together through all the days of the world, and through all the generations of men. So the sentence was passed, and it was terrible, and it was merciful, and both of these were true at once. The four went out to their appointed works. The flood was coming. A righteous man had been warned, and somewhere below the throne, in the corruption and the crying of that ruined age, there was a man who walked with God, and heaven was not finished speaking to him yet. Chapter 5. Enoch, Scribe of the Watcher's Doom. There was a man the world had lost track of. No one among the children of men knew where Enoch was, where he stayed, where he walked, what had become of him. He had slipped out of the ordinary sight of the ordinary world, and the reason was simple, though no one below could have guessed it. His days were not spent among men at all. His days were spent with the holy ones. His work had to do with the watchers. While the earth groaned under the giants and the crying rose to heaven, this one man moved quietly along the seam between the two worlds, at home in a country the rest of humanity could not find. And one day, as Enoch was blessing the Lord of Majesty and the King of the Ages, the watchers called to him. Enoch, they said, Enoch the scribe. For that was what he was, the scribe of righteousness, the one who wrote things down truly, whose words could be trusted to carry exactly what was given him to carry. And what he was given now was a sentence. Go, they told him. Go and declare it to the watchers of heaven, to those who abandoned the high heaven, the holy and eternal place, and came down and defiled themselves with women, and did as the earthborn do, and took wives for themselves. Go and say to them, you have worked great destruction upon the earth, and you shall have no peace and no forgiveness of your sin. You take such delight in your children, so hear what is coming. You will watch the murder of the ones you love. You will see your children destroyed, and you will lament over them, and you will make supplication for them without end, on and on into eternity. And still you will never reach mercy, and never reach peace. So Enoch went, and he spoke the doom. He went first to Azazel, the great teacher, and he did not soften it. Azazel, he said, you shall have no peace. A severe sentence has gone out against you to bind you fast. There will be no tolerance for you, no request granted on your behalf, because of the unrighteousness you taught, because of every work of godlessness and sin you showed to men. Then he went and stood before all of them together, the whole company of the fallen, and delivered the words of righteousness. And fear and trembling took hold of them, everyone, the sons of heaven, who had looked down from the height and decided the daughters of men were theirs for the taking, who had held the secrets of heaven in their hands and scattered them like seed, turned to this single mortal man and begged him for help. They beseeched Enoch to write out a petition for them, to set down their prayer for forgiveness in words, and then to carry it up and read it aloud in the presence of the Lord of heaven himself. For they could not do it themselves. They could no longer speak with him. They could not so much as lift their eyes toward heaven, not for the distance, but for the shame. So heavy was the weight of the sins they had been condemned for. And so the direction they had thrown away, up, now had to be traveled for them by a man. A creature of the very dust they had despised was now the only one among them who could still look God in the face. Enoch did not refuse them. Whatever else the scribe of righteousness was, he was not cruel to the condemned. He wrote out their petition, the full prayer concerning their spirits and their deeds, each one of them, and their request that they might yet find forgiveness and length of days. He gathered the whole weight of their fear and their longing into words and carried it away to read. He went off alone, south of Hermon, and came to the waters of Dan in the land of Dan, and there he sat down beside the running water with the petition in his hands, and he read it. He read the prayer of the fallen sons of heaven over and over in that quiet place, the water going past, the words of the doomed on his lips, until the reading grew slow, and his eyes grew heavy, and sleep came over him beside the waters of Dan. And as he slept, a dream came down upon him. Visions fell over him, visions of chastisement, of judgment, of things no waking eye had seen. And out of the vision a voice spoke, and the voice had an errand for him. What he was being shown, he was to carry back and tell to the sons of heaven. He was to stand before the watchers once more and speak. The waters of Dan ran on in the dark, and Enoch, asleep on the border of the world, began to rise. Chapter 6. The throne of the great glory. The clouds came for him. In the vision they gathered around Enoch and lifted him, a mist rising to summon him upward, the very course of the stars and the racing of the lightnings sweeping him along. The winds took hold of him and made him fly, bore him up off the border of the world, and carried him into heaven. He did not climb. He was carried, the way a leaf is carried, upward and inward toward something no man had been permitted to approach. And he came to a wall. It was built of crystal, and it was ringed all around with tongues of fire. And the sight of it began to frighten him, for there was no way onward except straight through the flame. So he went into the tongues of fire and passed through, and came to a great house built entirely of crystal. Its walls were laid like a floor of fitted crystal tiles, and its foundation was crystal, and its ceiling was like the path of the stars, threaded with lightnings, and among them moved cherubim of fire. And overhead the heaven of that house was clear as water. Flame ran around the walls, the doorways blazed. He stepped inside, and it was a place of impossible contradiction, hot as fire and cold as ice at once, and in all of it not one comfort, nothing that a body could rest in. Fear closed over him, trembling took him, and Enoch fell on his face. And as he lay there shaking, he lifted his eyes and saw that this vast house was only the antechamber. Beyond it stood a second house, greater than the first, its great portal standing open before him, and it was built of living flame. It surpassed the first in splendor and in size so far beyond telling that Enoch could find no words for it, then or after. Its floor was fire. Above it ran the lightnings and the paths of the stars. Its ceiling, too, was flaming fire. And in the heart of that house of fire stood a throne. It was lofty, and its appearance was as crystal, and its wheels were like the shining sun, and around it was the vision of the cherubim. From beneath the throne poured streams of flaming fire, so bright that Enoch could not bear to look at it. And upon the throne sat the great Glory. His robe blazed brighter than the sun and was whiter than any snow that ever fell. No angel could enter there. None could look upon his face, not for any lack of love, but for the sheer magnificence and glory of it. No flesh is able to behold him. Fire surrounded him, and a great fire stood before him, and none of all that host could draw near. 10,000 times 10,000 stood in his presence, and yet he needed no counsel from any of them. The most holy ones, the nearest, never withdrew from him by night and never departed. And Enoch lay on his face at the threshold of it, trembling, the smallest and most mortal thing in all that ocean of fire. Then, out of the center of the unapproachable, a voice spoke his name. The Lord called him with his own mouth and said, "Come hither, Enoch, and hear my word." One of the holy ones came and lifted the trembling man and brought him to his feet and led him toward the door. And Enoch went and bowed his face down low. And the voice came again, and it was not the voice of wrath he had braced for. "Fear not, Enoch," it said, "you righteous man, you scribe of righteousness. Come closer and hear." 10,000 times 10,000 blazing ones stood in that hall and could not approach. And the one on the throne reached past every one of them to call forward a single frightened human being by his name. The creature of dust, whom the fallen angels had despised, was the one summoned to the foot of the throne to hear the word of God. And the word was for the watchers. "Go," the Lord said, "and say to the watchers of heaven, who sent you here to intercede for them, it is you who ought to intercede for men, and not men for you. Why did you abandon the high and holy and eternal heaven? Why did you lie with women and defile yourselves with the daughters of men and take wives and do as the earthborn do and father giants for sons? You were holy. You were spirit. You were living the eternal life, deathless through all the generations of the world, and you defiled that with the blood of flesh and lusted after flesh and blood exactly as the creatures do who die and perish." Then the Lord unfolded the deep reason of it, the thing the watchers in their hunger had never stopped to see. "To men I gave wives," he said, "so that they might have children, so that nothing would be wanting to them on the earth, because men die. Children are the answer death gives to the dying, the way a mortal race continues past its own graves. But you were never dying. You were spirit, immortal, your dwelling in heaven forever. You had no need of children, because you had no death to outrun. I never appointed wives for you, for the place of the spirits of heaven is heaven. And you reached down anyway, out of eternity into the blood, and took for yourselves a remedy meant only for the doomed. And so you have made yourselves like the doomed." Their petition, therefore, the careful petition Enoch had written and carried and read by the waters of Dan, would not be granted. Not ever. Not through all the days of eternity. They would never again ascend into heaven. The decree had gone out to bind them in the earth for all the ages of the world. And first they would watch their beloved sons cut down before them by the sword, and take no comfort in them. Though they wept, though they prayed, though they spoke aloud every word written in Enoch's petition, it would not be granted, not on their sons' behalf, and not on their own. And then the Lord revealed the thing that was worse than the flood, what the flood would fail to end. "The giants," he said, "born of spirit and flesh, will be called evil spirits upon the earth, and the earth will be their dwelling. For evil spirits have come out of their bodies. Because they were born from the union of the holy watchers and the daughters of men, they belong to neither heaven nor earth cleanly. The spirits of heaven have their home in heaven. The spirits born upon the earth have their home on the earth. And these homeless things that came from the giant's flesh will remain here. They will afflict and oppress and destroy and attack and make war and work ruin across the earth and bring grief. They will eat no food, and yet they will hunger. They will drink nothing, and yet they will thirst. And they will rise up against the children of men and against the women, because it was from men and women that they first came. So the water that was coming would drown the giants' bodies, but not the evil in them. From the day of that slaughter, the spirits loosed from their corpses would go on destroying, unpunished, unjudged, all the way down the long corridor of the ages, until the very last day, the great consummation when judgment would fall at once and forever upon the watchers and all the godless. The flood would end an era. It would not end the haunting. And say this to them also, the Lord finished. You were in heaven, but not all its mysteries had been revealed to you. What you knew were the worthless ones, the base secrets. And in the hardness of your hearts you handed even those to the women, and through them men and women now work great evil upon the earth. Say to them, therefore, and here was the whole sentence, folded down into 3 final words, you have no peace. Then Enoch woke. He came down out of the vision and out of sleep, and he went back to them. They were sitting gathered together where he had left them, in the place between the mountains, weeping, their faces covered, the 200, or what remained of them, waiting for the mercy their petition had asked. And Enoch stood before the fallen sons of heaven, the man they had sent to plead for them, and he recounted everything he had seen: the wall of fire, the crystal house, the throne, the great glory, and the answer given to him with the mouth of God. He spoke the words of righteousness over them. He reprimanded the watchers of heaven to their covered faces, and he did not spare them the last 3 words. There would be no forgiveness. There would be no return. The intercession was over, and the man who could still look upon heaven turned from the weeping angels, because heaven had far more to show him yet. Chapter 7. To the ends of the earth. They took him, and they carried him out to the edges of everything. The ones who bore him now were like flaming fire, though when they wished they took the shape of men, and they brought Enoch to places no living foot had ever walked, to a mountain whose summit touched heaven, to the treasuries where the stars and the thunder are kept, to a river where fire flows like water and empties into the western sea. He passed the mountains of winter's darkness and came to the place from which all the waters of the deep pour out, and saw the mouths of every river on the earth and the mouth of the abyss itself. He was being shown the back rooms of creation, the machinery behind the world. And everywhere he looked, he found the same astonishing thing. It was all prepared. None of it was accident. He saw the storehouses of the winds and how God had furnished the whole creation out of them. He saw the cornerstone of the earth and the 4 winds that carry the earth and hold up the vault of the sky, the pillars of heaven standing in their place between above and below. He watched the winds turn the circuit of the sun and drive all the stars to their setting, the great clockwork of the heavens wheeling in perfect order, each light rising and crossing and going down exactly, on its appointed course, never early, never late. The sky, he saw, was not a scattering of lamps. It was an engine of obedience, and every part of it kept its station, which is why the next thing he saw was so terrible. Beyond a certain abyss, he came to a place with no firmament above it and no earth beneath it, no water, no living thing, a waste and horrible emptiness. And in that emptiness burned 7 stars, like great mountains on fire, chained. Enoch asked what they were, and the angel told him, "This is the prison of the stars, of the host of heaven. These are the ones that transgressed the command of the Lord at the very beginning, that did not come forth at their appointed times, that would not keep to the order set for them. And he was angry and bound them here for 10,000 years, until the full weight of their guilt is spent. Stars imprisoned for rising out of turn." And Enoch understood, standing there, that he was looking at the very shape of the watcher's sin written across the sky. To leave your appointed place, to refuse the station given you. That was all it took. The same darkness waited to receive them. For Uriel showed him another place still worse. A great fire cleft down to the abyss and told him plainly, "This is the prison of the fallen angels, and here they will be shut away forever. Here the ones who join themselves to women, whose wandering spirits would go on defiling mankind and luring them to offer sacrifice to demons as though demons were gods. Here they would stand and wait and be judged at the last. I, Enoch, alone saw this vision," he would say afterward, "the ends of all things, and no man shall see what I have seen." From the place of punishment he was brought westward to a great high mountain of hard rock, and inside it were 4 hollow places, deep and smooth, 3 of them dark, and 1 of them bright, with a clear spring of water shining in its midst. Raphael told him what they were for. These chambers were made to receive the souls of the dead. Here every human being who dies must come and wait, gathered and kept until the day of judgment. And they are divided. The righteous wait in the bright hollow by the living spring. The wicked wait in the dark, set apart in their pain, held for the great day of reckoning. And as Enoch looked, he saw one spirit crying out, its voice going up to heaven, ceaseless. "Whose is that?" he asked, "whose voice will not stop?" And Raphael answered, "That is the spirit of Abel, whom his brother Cain killed. He makes his accusation still and will not fall silent until the last of Cain's seed is wiped from the earth. The first murdered man in all the world, still crying up from the chambers of the dead. For the blood that cries from the ground does not stop crying, not until justice is done." And Enoch blessed the Lord of righteousness, who rules forever. Then the journey turned toward beauty. He came to 7 magnificent mountains of precious stone, colored stone and pearl and jacinth and burning red rock, and the 7th stood highest among them in the very middle, shaped like the seat of a throne, ringed all around with fragrant trees. And among those trees was one tree unlike anything Enoch had ever known, a fragrance beyond all fragrance, leaves and blossoms and wood that would never wither in all the ages, and fruit as lovely as the dates of a palm. "How beautiful this tree is," Enoch said, and Michael answered him, "That high mountain shaped like a throne," he said, "is the throne of God, the seat where the Holy Great One, the Eternal King, will sit when he comes down at last to visit the earth with goodness. And as for this tree, no mortal is permitted to touch it. Not yet. It is being kept, guarded through all the long ages, until the great judgment, when everything is brought to its end. And then it will be given to the righteous and the holy. Its fruit will be food for the elect. It will be carried to the holy place, to the temple of the Lord, and the ones who eat of it will live long lives free of sorrow and plague and torment, and its fragrance will be in their very bones. The tree of life held in reserve, mercy kept in storage for the day it can finally be given away." He went on to the center of the earth, to a blessed place of streams and holy mountains, and there, cutting between the mountains, he found a deep and terrible valley. "What is this cursed place?" he asked, in the midst of so much blessing. And Uriel told him, "This valley is for the accursed. Here will be gathered all those who speak hard and arrogant words against the Lord and against his glory. Here is the place of their judgment. And here, in the last days, in full view of that judgment, the righteous will bless the Lord for his mercy." Even at the middle of the world, beside the holy place, a room stood ready for the blasphemers, and a witness stood ready for the just. And far to the east, past the fragrant mountains of nard and cinnamon, beyond a sea, he came at last to the garden of righteousness. There grew trees more beautiful than any he had seen, and among them one very great and glorious tree. And this one Enoch recognized before he was told. By the ache it woke in him. "How beautiful it is," he said. And Raphael answered quietly, "This is the tree of wisdom. This is the tree of which your father, ancient now, and your aged mother who lived before you, once ate, and their eyes were opened, and they knew that they were naked, and they were driven out of the garden." So Enoch stood before the very tree that had ended Eden, the tree from which the whole long story of his own broken race had flowed. He was the descendant of the two who had eaten and been exiled. And here he stood in the garden they had lost, permitted to see it, permitted to walk to the ends of all things and come back again. He had seen the storehouses of the winds and the pillars that hold up the sky. He had seen the prison of the stars and the prison of the angels, the chambers of the dead divided into light and dark, the throne where God will sit, the tree of life kept for the righteous, and the valley kept for the cursed, and the tree of knowledge that opened the eyes of the first man and woman. And in all of it, he had found no chaos anywhere, only a house set in perfect order, every room appointed, every place prepared, justice and mercy built into the foundations of the world before any of it was ever needed. Again and again, at the edge of each wonder, Enoch bowed and blessed the Lord of glory, the eternal King. But the deepest things he was to be shown were not places at all. They were the days that had not yet come, and the one who was hidden from before the beginning to bring them. Chapter 8. The Son of Man. Now the visions changed. Enoch had been shown the places of the world, its foundations, its prisons, its chambers of the waiting dead. But the deepest things he was given to see were not places at all. He was lifted into a vision of the end of all things, and there he saw two. The first was ancient beyond ancientness, one with a head of days, whose hair was white like pure wool, the Eternal One himself, seated in the light. And beside him stood another, and this one's face was the face of a man, gracious and full of kindness, like the countenance of one of the holy angels. Enoch could not take his eyes from the second figure. So he turned to the angel who walked with him and showed him all hidden things, and he asked, "Who is that? Who is this Son of Man? Where does he come from, and why does he stand so close beside the Ancient of Days?" And the angel answered him, "This," he said, "is the Son of Man who has righteousness, with whom righteousness makes its home, who unseals every treasure of the things that are hidden. The Lord of spirits has chosen him. His portion surpasses all others before the Lord of spirits, in uprightness forever." And then the angel told Enoch the thing that undid him, the secret at the root of the world. That Son of Man was named in the presence of the Lord of spirits before the world had begun, before the sun was kindled, before the signs of the zodiac were set in their places, before a single star of heaven was made. His name was already spoken. Enoch, who had just come from the far places where he had watched the sun driven along its circuit and seeing the very stars chained in their prison for rising out of turn, now understood that all of it, every wheeling light in the sky, was younger than this. Before there was anything to give light, this one's name had been named. He had been chosen and hidden and kept in reserve with God from before the creation of the world and forevermore. Everything Enoch had been shown that was held back for the last day. The tree of life no mortal could yet touch, the chambers where the dead lay waiting, the storehouses of blessing sealed in heaven. All of it was gathered up and answered in this. The greatest reserved thing in all creation was not a thing at all. It was a person, kept since before the beginning, for the sake of the end. And what was he kept for? For the ones who had nothing. He would be a staff for the righteous to lean on so that they would not fall. He would be the light of the nations and the hope of everyone troubled of heart. Beside him, Enoch saw a fountain of righteousness that never ran dry, and around it countless springs of wisdom. And all the thirsty came and drank and were filled, and their homes were among the holy and the elect. To the poor in spirit and the persecuted and the grieving, this hidden one was the whole of their hope, and in his name they were saved. But to the great ones of the earth, he was something else entirely. For the Son of Man was also the end of every tyrant. Enoch saw how he would come to the kings and the mighty and the exalted, to all who possess the earth and rule it, and pull them down from their seats. He would loosen the reins of the strong and break the teeth of the sinners. And the charge against them was not merely cruelty. It was this, that they never once acknowledged where their power had come from. They did not extol the one who had lent them their kingdoms. They trusted instead in their riches and put their faith in gods they had shaped with their own hands. And they raised those hands against the Most High. And they hunted down the faithful who clung to the name of the Lord of spirits. They had ruled as if the world were theirs, and they had forgotten that it was only ever loaned. Then Enoch saw the day itself arrive. The Lord of spirits issued a summons to all of them, to the kings and the mighty and the exalted and all who dwell upon the earth. Open your eyes, he said, lift up your heads if you are able to recognize the elect one. And he seated that Son of Man upon the throne of his own glory, and the Spirit of righteousness was poured out upon him, and the word of his mouth alone was enough to slay the wicked, so that all the unrighteous were swept from before his face. And the kings stood up, and they looked, and they recognized him. Pain seized them then, the way labor seizes a woman when the child comes to the mouth of the womb, sudden and total and impossible to escape. They looked at one another in terror, their faces falling, when they saw that Son of Man seated on the throne of glory. And then they did the thing they had refused to do their whole lives. They fell down on their faces before him and worshipped, and set their hope on him and begged him for mercy at his hands. The mercy they had never once shown, they now pleaded to receive. But the door had closed. The Lord of spirits pressed them out from his presence, and they went stumbling away with their faces full of shame, the darkness thickening over them, and they were handed to the angels of punishment. And out of them came a confession. And this is the most terrible thing in all the vision, because the confession was true. They blessed the Lord of spirits. They said, "Now we have learned that we should have glorified him." They said, "Our hope was in the scepter of our kingdom, and in our own glory, and in the day of our suffering, he does not save us." They said, "Light has vanished from before us, and darkness is our dwelling now, forever." Every word of it was right. It was the truest thing those men had ever said. And they said it one day too late, when it could no longer save them, when the saying of it was only the beginning of their grief. And for the righteous, the same day dawned as pure joy. The ones who had been despised and downtrodden were saved, and they would never again have to look upon the faces of the wicked. They were clothed in garments of glory, garments of life given by the Lord of spirits, that would never grow old, whose brightness would never fade. And they would eat with that Son of Man, and lie down and rise up with him forever and ever. Then Enoch saw the whole earth answer. In those days, the earth would give back what had been entrusted to it, and Sheol would give back what it had received, and the grave would surrender everything it owed. The dead returned, the lost restored. The elect one would rise and choose out the righteous and the holy, for the day of their rescue had come near. He would sit upon the throne of God and pour from his mouth all the secrets of wisdom. And at the sight of it, the mountains themselves would leap like rams, and the hills skip like lambs full of milk, and the faces of all the angels in heaven would be lit with joy, and the earth would rejoice, and the righteous would walk upon a world at last made glad. This was the one who had been hidden since before the first star, now revealed. This was the secret the whole waiting universe had been built around. But Enoch was not yet finished. He had seen the end. Now he would be shown the long and terrible road that led to it, not in fire and thrones this time, but in a dream of beasts. Chapter 9. The Dream of the Beasts, Part 1. There were 2 dreams that Enoch carried all his life, and near the end of it he sat his son Methuselah down to tell them. The first had come to him when he was young, before he had taken a wife, in the days when he was still learning to write. He had lain down to sleep in the house of his grandfather, and in the night he saw the heaven itself collapse, torn loose and hurled down upon the earth. And where it struck, the earth was swallowed into a great abyss. Mountains sank upon mountains, hills went down into hills, tall trees were ripped from their roots and dragged under. A word rose in his throat, and he cried out in his sleep, "The earth is destroyed." His grandfather woke him and asked why he wept so, and when Enoch told him the dream, the old man's face grew grave. "This is no small thing you have seen," he said. "This is the sin of the whole earth. It must sink into the abyss and be destroyed. Rise, my child, and pray, since you are a believer, that a remnant may be left, and that the Lord will not wipe out all the earth." So Enoch rose and prayed, and it is a prayer worth remembering, because it was the prayer of a boy asking God to spare the world. "Blessed are you, O Lord, King of all creation," he said. "You made all things and rule all things, and nothing is hidden from you. And now the angels of your heaven have sinned, and your wrath lies upon the flesh of men until the great day of judgment. I beg you, do not destroy all flesh and leave the earth empty. Destroy the flesh that has provoked you, but the flesh of the righteous, establish it as a plant of the eternal seed. Do not hide your face from the prayer of your servant." He did not yet know that the flood he had dreamed was truly coming. He did not know that the remnant he prayed for already had a name. But the prayer went up, and it was heard. And then, years later, the second dream came. And this one showed him everything. He saw a bull come up white out of the earth, and beside him a heifer, and this was the first man and his mate at the dawn of the world. From them came 2 young bulls, one black and one red. And Enoch watched, helpless in the dream, as the black bull lowered its head and gored the red one and chased it across the field until the red bull was gone. It was the first murder in the world, played out between 2 calves in a meadow, one brother destroying the other, while the mother cow wandered lowing and grieving and could not find her lost one. Then another white bull was born to comfort her, and from him came many, and the herd spread across the earth. But Enoch had seen this herd's future before, and now he watched the sky open a second time. A single star fell from heaven and came down and grazed among the cattle. Then many stars fell after it, casting themselves down out of the height. And where they landed, they became bulls and mingled with the herd. And they bred upon the cows monstrous things, elephants and camels and asses, creatures that had no business walking the earth. The whole herd shied and trembled before them, and Enoch understood that he was watching the fall of the watchers again, and the birth of the giants retold from above as a nightmare among beasts. Then 7 white men came down out of heaven. 3 of them took Enoch by the hand and lifted him to a high tower and set him there to watch it all unfold. And from that tower he saw the judgment fall. One of the shining men seized the first fallen star and bound it and cast it into a narrow, dark, and horrible abyss. Another put a sword into the hands of the monstrous beasts, so that they turned and slaughtered one another, and another gathered the great fallen stars and bound them hand and foot and threw them down into a chasm of the earth. Everything Enoch had been told at the throne, he now saw happen. The binding of Azazel, the giants turned against themselves, the watchers sealed in the deep. And then came the water. One of the white men went to a certain white bull and taught him a secret. And that bull became a man and built himself a great vessel and went inside it, and 3 bulls went in with him. And Enoch saw a high roof open with 7 torrents pouring through it, and fountains breaking open across the earth. And the waters rose and rose until they swallowed the whole herd. Every ox, every elephant and camel and ass, every living thing sinking into the dark and not rising. Only the vessel floated, riding high above a drowned world. This was the flood Enoch had dreamed of as a boy. And this man in the vessel lifted above the ruin with a remnant sealed inside. This was the answer to the prayer he had prayed. The plant of the eternal seed, kept alive on the face of the deep. The waters ran off at last, and the vessel came to rest, and the darkness withdrew, and light returned. And the man came out with his 3 sons to begin the world again. From them the earth filled once more, and now it filled with every kind of beast, lions and tigers and wolves, dogs and hyenas and boars, foxes and vultures and eagles, the nations of the world in all their variety and appetite. And among them was born a white bull, and from him came a wild ass, and another white bull, and from that one came a black boar, and a single white sheep. And with that sheep, the story of the world narrowed down to one small, gentle, defenseless flock, surrounded on every side by teeth. Enoch watched their long ordeal begin. One of the 12 was handed to the wild asses, and by them to the wolves, and so the whole flock came to dwell among the wolves in a strange land. The wolves grew cruel and pressed them hard, and cast the little ones of the flock into a river of deep water. And the sheep lifted up their voices and cried to their Lord over their drowned young. One sheep escaped the wolves and fled far off, and when the flock's crying reached its height, the Lord of the sheep came down from his high place at the sound of their weeping. He called the escaped sheep back and sent it, with another beside it, into the very assembly of the wolves to warn them. And when the wolves would not relent, the Lord struck them, and the flock went out from among them. The wolves gave chase, all their power behind them, until the fleeing flock came up against a sea, and the sea stood up. The water divided and held itself in 2 walls, on this side and on that. And the Lord of the sheep went down into the midst and set himself between the flock and their pursuers. And his face was dazzling and glorious and terrible to look upon. The flock passed through on dry ground. The wolves rushed in after them, and the walls of water fell together and closed over the wolves, and every one of them that had chased the sheep was drowned in the sea. Beyond the water lay a wilderness with no grass and no water. And there slowly the sheep began to open their eyes. Their leader climbed to the summit of a lofty rock, and the Lord of the sheep stood before the whole flock, great and majestic and terrible, so that they trembled and cried, "We cannot stand before our Lord, we cannot look upon him." But while their leader was up on the rock, the flock's eyes clouded over again, and they wandered from the path, blinded, and the Lord's anger burned against them, and the leader had to come down and find most of the flock fallen away, and bring them back by force. Then that sheep became a man, and built a house for the Lord of the sheep, and gathered the whole flock into it. And when at last he lay down and fell asleep, the flock wept over him with great weeping, and 2 new leaders rose in his place. And they crossed a stream of water and came into a good and pleasant and glorious land, and the house of the Lord stood among them there. For a while it was almost well. Their eyes opened and closed by turns down the years. Beasts came to devour them, and a ram rose up to drive the beasts back. But that ram forsook its own glory and began to trample the very flock it guarded, and had to be replaced by another, a shepherd ram the Lord raised up, who was hunted by the first, but outlived him, and led the flock into strength, so that the wild beasts fled and robbed them no more. And the house grew great and broad, and upon it was raised a tower, lofty and high. And the Lord of the sheep stood upon that tower, and a full table was spread before him. And Enoch, watching from the tower, let himself hope. For one moment the long dread lifted, and it looked as though the whole story might simply end here, in safety, God dwelling in the midst of his flock, with the sheep at rest beneath him. It did not last. Enoch watched the flock err again, and wander again, and forsake the house. The Lord sent sheep to them, messengers one after another to call them back. And the flock turned on the messengers and killed them. And Enoch, up on his tower, felt the old helplessness settle over him again. One was saved and snatched up and carried away to the tower where he stood watching, but the rest were slain, and still more were sent only to weep over a flock that would not hear. And in the end they abandoned the house and the tower entirely, and their eyes went fully dark. Then the Lord gave them up. He handed them over to the lions and the tigers, the wolves and the hyenas and the foxes, and every wild beast of the field, and the beasts fell upon the flock and tore them. And Enoch, up on his tower, could not bear it. He cried aloud with all his strength and appealed to the Lord of the sheep. "Look, they are being devoured. They are being torn to pieces. Do something." But the Lord of the sheep remained unmoved. He saw it all, and he did not stop it. And he left the flock in the mouths of the beasts. And then he called 70 shepherds, and he handed the sheep over to them. Chapter 10. The Dream of the Beasts, Part 2. 70 shepherds. That was the number the Lord of the sheep called to him, and into their hands he gave the flock. And he gave them a command, and it was exact. "Pasture the sheep," he told them, "and do only what I command you. I am handing them over to you counted, numbered, everyone, and I will tell you which of them are to be destroyed. Destroy only those." The suffering that was coming upon the flock then was not chaos let loose. It was measured, a precise amount permitted, and no more. The shepherds were not given the flock to do with as they pleased. They were given a commission with a limit written into it. And then the Lord did something that changes the meaning of everything that follows. He called another, a scribe, and set him to watch. "Observe everything the shepherds do to these sheep," he said, "for they will destroy more of them than I have commanded. Write it down. Record how many they kill by my command, and how many they kill by their own cruelty beyond it. Keep the count against each shepherd one by one, and read it out before me, so that I may have it as testimony against them. and know exactly what they have done. But do not tell them you are watching. Only write." Enoch, who was himself the scribe of righteousness, now watched another scribe take up the pen. And he understood something about the stillness of God that had so tormented him a moment before. When the Lord had remained unmoved while the beasts tore the flock, it had looked like indifference. It was not indifference, it was a court in session. The silence was the silence of a judge who is letting the record be written, who permits the deed and measures it, and writes down every stroke that falls beyond the measure, and waits. A book was being kept. But the keeping of the book did not make the watching easier to bear. The shepherds pastured the flock, and at once they began to kill more than they were bidden. They handed the sheep to the lions and the tigers, and the wild boars ate alongside them, and the flock was torn. And then the shepherds burned the tower and pulled down the house itself. Enoch wept. He grieved without measure over that ruined house, the house where the Lord had stood upon the tower, and the full table had been spread. And after it fell, he could no longer even see whether any of the sheep still had a home to enter. And through it all, the scribe kept writing, day by day, every sheep destroyed, set down in the book. And the book was carried up and read before the Lord of the sheep, and he took it and read it and sealed it and laid it down. Then 3 of the sheep turned back. They came and began to raise up again everything that had fallen of that house, and though the wild boars tried to stop them, they could not. The sheep rebuilt and reared the tower once more, and set a table before it again. But the bread upon that table was polluted and not pure. The house stood, but something in its worship was already unclean, and the eyes of the flock stayed dark, and the eyes of their shepherds with them, and still the killing went on, more than had ever been commanded. And then the birds came. Out of heaven descended the eagles and the vultures and the kites and the ravens, and the eagles led them all, and they fell upon the flock, not only to devour their flesh, but to pick out their eyes. Enoch watched the sheep torn until neither flesh nor skin nor sinew was left on them, until only their bones stood there, and then even their bones fell to the earth, and the flock grew few. A people reduced to bones, blind, scattered, nearly gone from the world, with the birds of empire wheeling over the remnant. But out of that ruin, something was born. Lambs came from the surviving sheep, and these lambs began to open their eyes. They began to see. They cried out to the deaf and blinded flock to wake, though the flock would not hear them. And then horns began to grow upon the lambs. And Enoch watched until on one of the sheep there sprouted a single great horn, and its eyes were fully opened, and it looked at the flock and cried to them, and the rams saw it and came running to it from every side. The birds and the beasts flung themselves against that horn, battling to break it, swooping and tearing, but they had no power over it. It would not be broken, and a great sword was given to the flock. And the sheep who had been devoured for so long rose up at last, and went out against all the beasts of the field, and the beasts and the birds of heaven fled before their faces. Then the Lord of the sheep came. He came down in wrath, and everyone who saw him fled, and all of them fell down before his face. He took in his hand the staff of his wrath, and he struck the earth, and the earth split open. It clove asunder, and all the beasts and all the birds of heaven that had torn the flock fell from among the sheep and were swallowed into the earth, and the ground closed over them and covered them. And a throne was set up in the pleasant land, and the Lord of the sheep sat upon it. And the sealed books, all of them, the whole record kept across the long ages, were opened before him. Now the reckoning came, and it came in the order the whole book had been building toward. First, the fallen stars were brought forward, beginning with the very first one that had led the way down. The watchers, judged at last, found guilty, and cast into an abyss full of fire and pillars of flame. Then the 70 shepherds were brought, all of them bound, and their book was read. Every stroke beyond the measure counted against them. And they too were judged and found guilty and thrown into the fiery abyss. And then the blinded sheep, the ones who had chosen their blindness, who had forsaken the house and could no longer see the good, they were judged and cast into a burning abyss of their own, open to the right of the house. And when the judgment was finished, Enoch saw the old house folded up. They took it down, its pillars, its beams, all its ornaments, and folded the whole of it together and carried it away to the south of the land and laid it down. And in its place the Lord of the sheep brought a new house, greater and higher than the first, its pillars new, its ornaments new and larger than the old. And he set it up where the first had stood, and he gathered all the sheep inside it. And the surviving beasts of the field and birds of heaven, all of them, came and fell down and did homage to the sheep, and made their petition to them and obeyed them in everything. Then Enoch himself was brought down into the vision. The 3 shining ones who had first lifted him to the tower, and the great horn along with them, took him by the hand and set him down in the midst of the flock. And the sheep were all white now, their wool abundant and clean. All that had been destroyed and dispersed, and all the beasts and all the birds were gathered into that house, and the Lord of the sheep rejoiced with great joy because they had all come home and were all good. The great sword was carried back in and laid down and sealed before him, and the eyes of every one of them were opened, and they saw the good, and there was not a single one among them that could not see. And then a white bull was born. He was born with great horns, and all the beasts of the field and all the birds of heaven feared him and made their petition to him without ceasing. And as Enoch watched, the whole flock was transformed. Generation upon generation of them changed, until they all became white bulls, shining and pure. The vision that had begun with a single white bull rising out of the earth at the dawn of the world now ended with all of them made white bulls together. The whole redeemed multitude returned to the purity of the very first morning, not as it had been, but greater and universal and unable ever to fall again. And over the white bull with the great horns, and over all of them, the Lord of the sheep rejoiced. Then Enoch slept in their midst, and woke and saw that it was over. He blessed the Lord of righteousness and gave him glory. And then he wept. He wept with a great weeping and could not stop. And his tears ran and ran because of everything he had seen. For it would all come to pass, every deed of every age laid out before him in its order, the whole future of the world from the first murder to the final mourning. And that night he remembered the other dream, the boyhood dream of the heaven falling and the earth destroyed, and he wept again. He had been shown the end. He had been shown the road to it. There was only one thing left to do with what he had seen, and that was to carry it home to his children. Chapter 11. The Weeks of the World. So Enoch gathered his children, and he began to read to them from the books. He had walked the ends of the earth and stood before the throne and watched the whole future unfold as a dream of beasts. But there was a thing he had also learned from the heavenly tablets, quieter than a vision and just as vast: the shape of time itself. All of history, he told them, from the first age to the last, is folded into 10 weeks, 10 great turnings of the world, and it runs in a single direction, no matter how lost it looks along the way. Let me show you the whole of it, he said, so that you will not be troubled by the times you were born into. He was himself born in the first week, he told them, the 7th in the line of the righteous, while judgment and righteousness still held in the world. But after him, in the 2nd week, great wickedness would rise, and deceit would spring up, and there would come the first ending of things. And out of that ending, one man would be saved. That was the flood, and the one lifted above it. In the third week, a man would be chosen as the plant of righteous judgment, and his descendants would become the planting of righteousness forever, the beginning of the chosen line. In the fourth week, the holy would see visions, and a law would be given, and a boundary drawn around the people to keep them. In the fifth week, a house of glory and dominion would be built, the house on which the Lord had stood in the vision, honored above his flock. And then the long darkening. In the sixth week, those who lived in it would go blind, Enoch said, and their hearts would forsake wisdom. And in it, a man would be taken up, and at its close, the house of dominion would be burned with fire, and the whole chosen root scattered across the world. In the seventh week, an apostate generation would arise, and everything it did would be faithless. Enoch was describing to his children the very ruin he had just watched among the beasts, the burned tower, the blinded flock, the scattering, but naming it now as an appointed season, terrible but bounded with an end. For even the seventh week did not end in darkness. At its close, he said, the righteous would be chosen, an elect gathered out of the faithless age to receive a sevenfold instruction concerning all of God's creation. Out of the worst generation, a remnant would be handed the keys to wisdom, and from there, the whole current of time would turn. The eighth week would be a week of righteousness, Enoch said, and a sword would be put into its hand, not for cruelty, but so that a righteous judgment could at last fall upon the oppressors, and the sinners be delivered into the hands of the just. The ones who had spent the ages devouring the flock would find the flock risen against them, and at its close a house would be built for the great King in glory forever, and all mankind would begin to look toward the path of uprightness. In the ninth week, the righteous judgment would be revealed to the whole world, every work of the godless vanishing from the earth, the whole world of wickedness written down at last for destruction. And in the 10th week, in its 7th part, would come the great eternal judgment, the reckoning even upon the angels, the vengeance long promised against the watchers finally executed, and then time itself would open into something new. The first heaven would depart and pass away, Enoch told them, and a new heaven would appear, and all the powers of the heavens would shine with sevenfold light. And after that would come weeks beyond counting, weeks without number, on and on forever, and all of them would be goodness, and all of them righteousness, and sin would never be spoken of again for all eternity. That was where the 10 weeks led, not to ruin, to a light that never ends. Then Enoch lowered the books and looked at the people living inside those weeks, and his voice changed. For it was not enough to know the shape of the ages. A person had to choose which side of the judgment to stand on, and Enoch had watched too many choose wrongly to stay silent. So he turned, and he pronounced his woes, and he aimed them straight at the ones the world calls winners. "Woe to you who are rich," he said, "for you have trusted in your riches, and from your riches you will be torn. Woe to you who build your houses on the grievous toil of others, laying every brick with another man's suffering. Woe to you who use false measures, and to you lying witnesses, and to you who write down deceit and falsehood and dress it up as truth. Woe to you who repay your neighbor with evil, who devour the finest of the wheat while the poor go hungry, who acquire silver and gold by injustice, and then say in your hearts that your own hands have made you great. Woe to you who persecute the righteous. Woe to you who rejoice in the suffering of the just, who set their words at nothing, who lay your heavy yoke across their necks and will not lift it." And to every one of them Enoch spoke the same final sentence, the very words that had fallen on the fallen angels at the throne of glory: "You shall have no peace." The tyrant in his fine house and the watcher bound under the jagged rocks would come in the end to the same 3 words. But Enoch did not end on the woes. He turned last and most tenderly to the ones who had been crushed. He knew what they would say, the righteous who had suffered. He put their own grief into words. "We toiled our whole lives," they say, "and met with every trouble and were worn down to almost nothing. We were destroyed and found no one to help us, not even with a word. We hoped to be the head, and we became the tail. We became the food of the sinners, and they laid their yoke on us heavily. And when we cried out to the rulers over those who devoured us, the rulers would not listen. They helped our devourers instead and hid the oppression, and forgot that hands had been lifted against us." Enoch knew that cry to the bottom, and to it he gave an answer, and he swore it by the glory of the great and mighty one. "I have read the heavenly tablets," he told them. "I have seen the holy books, and I have found written there what is prepared for you, all goodness and all joy and all glory, prepared and written down for the spirits of those who die in righteousness. Your suffering is not the end of your story. It is not even the true measure of it. In heaven, the angels remember you for good, and your names are written before the glory of the Great One. You who were put to shame through affliction, you shall shine like the lights of heaven. You shall be seen shining, and the gates of heaven shall be opened to you. So be hopeful. Do not throw your hope away. And do not envy the sinners when you see them growing strong and prospering in their ways," he said. "Do not be deceived when the world calls the rich and comfortable blessed, saying, 'Look how they died in honor and never saw trouble.' For their souls go down into Sheol, into darkness and chains and a burning flame, and the great judgment is upon them for all the generations of the world. Their prosperity was never a blessing. It was a snare. Keep far from their violence, and you will become companions of the hosts of heaven." This was why the visions had been written down at all. Not for wonder, for this, so that the ones being ground under injustice in every age would know that the record was being kept, and the reward was being held in reserve, and the end was already set, and their tears were not falling into nothing. Enoch had shown his children the shape of all the ages, and the 2 roads that run through them, and where each one ends. He had one thing left to give them. Not another vision this time, a blessing, and the strange, bright story of a child who had not yet been born. Chapter 12. Enoch's Testament, the birth of Noah. In time, a child was born to Lamech, the son of Methuselah, and the child was like nothing anyone had ever seen. His skin was white as snow and flushed red as a blooming rose. The hair of his head and his long locks were white as wool, and his eyes were beautiful. And when he opened them for the first time, they blazed like the rays of the sun, and the whole house filled with light as though the sun had risen inside it. And then the newborn stood up in the hands of the midwife and opened his mouth and blessed the Lord of righteousness. His father Lamech took one look at him and was afraid. The story had begun with the sons of heaven coming down and fathering children who were not natural children, monstrous, ruinous, the giants that had devoured the world. And now here was a newborn with the radiance of an angel about him, shining, speaking, unlike any child of men. Lamech's mind went straight to the old terror. He fled to his father Methuselah and poured out his fear. "I have fathered a strange son," he said, "not like a man at all, more like the sons of the God of heaven. His nature is different. His eyes are like the sun's rays, and his face is glorious. I do not think this child is mine. I think he is sprung from the angels, and I am afraid of what may happen on the earth in his days. Go to Enoch, he begged his father. Go to Enoch, whose home is among the angels, and learn the truth from him. So Methuselah made the long journey to the ends of the earth, to the place where his father dwelt on the border of the world. And when he arrived, he cried aloud. And Enoch heard his voice and came to him. Here I am, my son, the old man said. Why have you come? And Methuselah told him everything, the impossible child, the light that filled the house, the newborn who rose up and blessed God, and Lamech's fear that the watchers had reached into his own house at last. And Enoch, who had seen all of it already, every thread of it, from the fall of the angels to the flood to the far end of the ages, gave his son the answer, and it turned the fear inside out. The Lord is about to do a new thing on the earth, he said. I have seen it in a vision, and I will tell you the truth of it. Yes, in the days of my father Jared, some of the angels of heaven broke the command of the Lord. They joined themselves to women and fathered children by them and brought forth the giants, and for all of it a great punishment is coming. There will be a deluge, a great destruction over the whole earth, and the earth will be washed clean of every impurity. But this child, Enoch said, this child is not what his father fears. This child is not the fruit of the corruption. He is the answer to it. For when the waters come and all mankind upon the earth dies, this one will be left. He and his 3 sons will be carried through the destruction and saved, and from them the world will begin again. Go and tell Lamech that the boy is truly his own son. No lie, no angel's child, but his son. And give him his name. Call him Noah, for he will be the one left to you, the one who will comfort the earth after all its grief. Long ago, when Enoch was only a boy, he had dreamed of the earth destroyed and had prayed with all his heart that God would not wipe out every living thing, but would leave a remnant, a plant of the eternal seed. He had not known then that his prayer would be answered in the arms of a midwife, in a child whose face shone like the sun. The radiance Lamech had dreaded was not the mark of the destroyer. It was the light of the one who would carry the world through the water. The angel children at the beginning of the story had been the ruin of the earth. This angel-bright child at the end of it would be its rescue. And Enoch did not soften the rest of the truth because he had read it plainly in the heavenly tablets. Even after Noah, he told his son, the world would not stay clean. Generation upon generation would fall back into wrong, more unrighteousness after the first, on, until at last a generation of righteousness would rise and transgression would be destroyed, and sin would pass from the earth, and all good would come upon it. The flood would save the seed, but the long story would still have to run its whole length before the morning. So Methuselah went home and told Lamech everything his father had shown him in secret, and they named the child Noah, the comfort of the earth. And the fear that had driven Lamech from his own son's cradle was turned by an old man at the ends of the earth into hope. But Enoch had one last thing to leave behind, not another vision, a testament. He wrote a final book for Methuselah and for all those who would come after him and keep faith in the last days. For you, he wrote, for whoever you are, reading this in an age I will never see, trying to do good in a world that punishes it. This is what I want you to know. Wait, he told them, you who have done good, wait for the day when an end is made of those who work evil, when the strength of the oppressors is finally broken. Wait until sin has passed away. The names of the wicked will be blotted out of the book of life, and there will be no earth left for them to stand on, only the fire and the crying. Enoch had seen that place, a blaze with no heaven in it, a depth he could not see the bottom of, full of the voices of weeping. That is where the blasphemers go, the ones who twist everything God has spoken. He had seen it, and he would not pretend he had not. But he had seen the other thing too, and this was the true end of everything he had to say. There are those, he wrote, who loved God more than they loved gold or silver or any good thing the world could offer, who gave their bodies over to hardship, who counted the whole of the world a passing breath and lived as though it were, who were tested again and again and came through pure, still blessing the name of the Lord. There are those who were trampled under the feet of wicked men, who were mocked and shamed and reviled all their lives, and who blessed God anyway to the end. All the blessings kept in store for those people, Enoch said, I have written down in the books. Not one of them is forgotten. And he set down the promise in the very voice of God, the last and best of all the reserved things he had been shown. I will summon the spirits of the good, the ones who belong to the generation of light. I will take those who were born in darkness, who in this life never received the honor their faithfulness deserved, and I will transform them. I will bring them out into shining light. I will seat each one upon the throne of his own honor, and they will shine for times beyond number. For righteousness is the judgment of God, and to the faithful he gives faithfulness in the dwelling place of upright paths. The ones born to darkness will go into the darkness, but the righteous will be radiant, and the sinners will cry aloud and watch them shine. That was Enoch's last word to his children and to us. Not the fire, but the light. Not the fear, but the throne kept ready. The ones the world grinds down into the dark are the very ones God has marked to bring out shining. And Enoch himself, the man who had always lived on the seam between the two worlds, whose days had been spent among the holy ones, who could still lift his eyes to heaven when the fallen angels no longer could, when he had said everything he was given to say and written everything he was given to write and set it all in his children's hands, the old story tells us simply this, that Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. He did not die like other men. He went home to the country he had always half belonged to, and this time he did not come back. But he left the books. He left them for the generations who would come after, the ones keeping faith in the last days, so that no one who ever loved heaven more than the world would face the darkness without knowing what waits on the other side of it. A light, a throne, a name still written in the book of life, and the God who takes his own the whole way home.